Hi, everybody, it's Michaela Beyer, and today I am interviewing musician Alvin Gibbs. A lot of people will know him as the bass player of the UK Subs, and then later on he joined Cheap and Nasty with my late interviewee Timo Calcio. And recently he has formed his own band, the Disobedient Servants, and turned to writing. Thank you so much for coming on, Alvin.
You're very welcome. It's good to finally meet you, Michaela.
Good to meet you too. Alrighty, so let's hear all about you. Where were you born and raised?
I was born in a town called Croydon, which is in southeast London, and I was raised in what you would call, I suppose, over there, the project. So, I mean, we're not talking about anything too heavy duty, but what's called in Britain a council estate. So it was for families on low income, and it was subsidised rent and things like that. So I was raised on an estate in South Croydon, and my father was English, my mother was Portuguese, which gave me a more sort of European perspective rather than sort of British centric sort of view of the world. And I spent most of my young years in Croydon, and then as soon as I could get out of there, I did, and my escape was really music. You know, there was actually sort of two ways of escaping your background in the period that I grew up. One was through sports, and I was quite a handy soccer player, and I played for my school team, and I played for a Sunday league team, and I had these delusions to playing professionally. But then I saw Mark Bolan on television when I was 14, and it all flipped around, and I went from wanting to be a professional soccer player to being a professional rock musician.
Yeah. And describe that first experience of seeing Mark Bolan, because I know that you grew up in a house where your parents weren't like really into music, but what was it about him that really transfixed you and got you where it counted?
Um, well, you got to remember, I was living on a council estate with some people that are just, very, I hate to use the word ordinary, but that's what they were. They didn't have great aspirations. Nobody particularly dressed well. This is the 70s, so early 70s. And the 60s, I hadn't even reached that place yet. It was most people had black and white television still, and so on. And then suddenly I saw Mark Bolan on television. We did have a colour TV at that point. In fact, we were one of the first people on the estate to actually have a colour TV. So all my friends would come around to watch it because
Cool.
they still have black and white ones. And so Mark Bolan was so the performance was so colourful, and so there was just this otherness to him and to his band, and the way they dressed, and there were these like really attractive women dancing around in hot pants, and I just thought that looks like a great job. Why would I want to clean the boots, the football boots of the first team doing trials for a professional team when I could be doing that? But of course, the drawback was I couldn't play anything. There were no traditions of musicality in my family. It was just an aspiration. I saw this, and it's kind of perverse, but I just went, I'm going to do that. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do that.
So describe the next move. I know that you saved up a lot of money to buy a guitar eventually through, I believe it was a delivery job, and then you got your first guitar.
Yeah, well, actually, the very first guitar I got, my mother bought for me via a catalogue. You used to have these catalogues for people who didn't have much money, and you could buy, I don't know, you could buy like a television, and you would pay £1 per week for so many months in order to acquire this television. And usually I would, when Christmas came around, I would say, oh, I want new soccer boots, or I want some sort of soccer related paraphernalia or whatever.
Yeah.
and they were sort of gobsmacked when I said, "Oh, I want a guitar." And so my mum very kindly got me this guitar. She paid like 50 pence a week for this thing, which tells you a lot about the sort of guitar it was. I mean, it was an acoustic guitar, and it was, you could buy it. You could basically drive a double-decker bus under the strings. It's the strength of 5 men to make a chord. But it was enough to get me started. And I had a friend at school who knew some basic chords, and so he taught me E major, A major, D major. Hey, you know, half of Mark Bolan's songs are written, you know, in E, and they go to A, and they go to D, and they go, you know. So it was enough to start sort of trying to write a song or two. And then eventually me and this friend at school, we got a band together. And these were the years of glam rock. So my first love was glam rock. And we loved Alice Cooper and Mott the Hoople and T-Rex, Slade, Sweet were big favourites. And then we started to go to gigs, go to shows. And I got to see Led Zeppelin, I got to see Black Sabbath. I saw AC/DC supporting the Flaming Groovies in a club for 300 people in Croydon.
Wow.
Yeah. And there was this club called the Greyhound, and we used to go there all the time. We saw all these sort of underground progressive rock bands and stuff. And it was fantastic, you know, it was wonderful. It was a wonderful experience. Suddenly I was in this whole new world where people had, you know, long hair, and there was the smell of patchouli oil in the air, and people dressed a certain way, you know, more the culture, counterculture kind of garb, and it was brilliant, and it was just so different to the way people dressed on the council estate that I lived on, and it just gave me it basically said to me, this is, I need to get out, I need to be with these people.
Yeah, those were the people that you felt a sense of community with.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. And you know, the way they thought, and I suppose some of the politics as well, basically talked to me. You know, I like the liberality of these people. I like the way they're free thinking, and it sort of encompassed everything. You know, it's like a lifestyle almost. So I embraced that, and that was fantastic. But then things got a bit pompous with that kind of music round about 1975. Bands like Yes and Queen and whatever came along, and they sort of, it's like they lost touch with the people that were going to their shows. You know, they're having to pay a lot of money to go and see them in really large auditoriums where there were little dots in the distance and whatever. And then punk rock happened, and at first I was a bit perplexed by it. I didn't know what it was about or whatever. And so still dressed as Johnny Thunders, I went to see the Ramones in 1977 at the same club, the Greyhound. And it was, yeah, it was one of those, it was again another life-changing moment. I saw the Ramones. I just remember going, there were these wooden glass doors that you opened to go in from the bar into the venue. And me and my friend opened these doors, and we would just, it was like opening the doors to an oven. We were just hit by this heat and sound. And there on the stage was the Ramones. And they were playing these simple songs. It was like they deconstructed rock to its simplest form, but most direct form. And I just thought it was fantastic, and I loved it. And I loved the uniform of the leather jacket and the denim jeans, and the, you know, and the way they moved, and it was just great. And then that was it. I was in that world. Then I wanted to become a play punk rock. So I joined my first punk rock band in 1978 called The Users. They'd already had 2 singles out, and I did some gigs and things with them. And then Brian James left the band called The Damned, and he was a very, very good, still is a very good guitar player. So I played in his band called Brian James and the Brains, and we supported the Police in Europe, and we did loads of shows around the UK.
Mhm.
And then, on the strength of the reputation I gained from that, I was able to audition and join the UK Subs in 1980.
Yes. And by that time, were you a very natural songwriter? I mean, I'm curious what it was like from the period where you began playing music. Did you automatically have songs in your head? And was it a solitary thing for you where you would think of something by yourself, or were you more collaborative, where you liked having a group of people around you when you wrote songs?
Right. Yeah. Well, initially, I wrote songs just on my own uh, because I couldn't find really anyone else to write songs with, or anyone that I could sort of go, look, I've got this. Have you got something? Have you got like a chorus to go with this, or have you got a middle eight? And there wasn't anyone around. You know, it was just me in the bedroom with the guitar.
Yes.
That's how I wrote Down on the Farm, by the way, is at my parents' place, sitting on the edge of the bed with my first electric guitar. And that riff, the opening riff, was that's where I came up with that. And later I added the verse and stuff. But it was, it was just me at first. And it wasn't really until I joined the Sub that I then found collaborators in Nicky Garrett, who was the guitar player, and Charlie Harper, who was the lead singer. Charlie would usually provide the lyrics for my music. Nicky would come up with a middle eight or a chorus or an intro or something for a song that I'd written that was incomplete. But then that's when I started to work in a more collaborative way in terms of my songwriting.
Okay. And the UK Subs are often described as a punk band, but you actually have a large scope of influences. When you've joined, did you feel like it was stylistically what you were looking for after having been in so many bands before that?
What I liked about the UK Subs is there were no kind of barriers to the sort of music that you could write and the sort of music we could play, really. I mean, a lot of it was rock and blues influenced. I mean, the first UK Subs album was called Another Kind of Blues, you know, and that's what it was. It was taking using the basic chord structures of the blues and rock, and then kind of revving them up and giving them a new a polish, a punk polish, and sort of trying to re-jig them for a new audience, and that's what we did. But we also did a lot of stuff that was quite almost experimental. If you listen to the second album I played on, Endangered Species, which is also the album Down on the Farm is on. On the B side, there's a lot of slower, more considered, more sort of musically involved stuff, almost like psychedelic furs, some of it. And that's what I loved about the Subs, was that it was, you could bring any kind of song along, and it would be listened to and discussed and rehearsed and practiced, and could end up on an album. You know, there were no, we didn't try and see ourselves as just a punk band. You know, we were, of course, we were a punk band, but not in, we didn't try to be a punk band. It's just the way it came out once we started playing it.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that I wanted to ask you about was your devotion to punk culture, because I know that in England at that time there was quite a lot of violence perpetuated against people in the punk scene. What was it about the scene that just still drove you to be a part of it and made you love it and want to go after it despite a lot of the barriers?
Well, it was actually very dangerous to be a punk rocker in 1978, 1979. Well, actually, from 1977 onwards, really, um, because the Sex Pistols had put out a song called "God Save the Queen," which was actually an anti-monarchy song in 1977, which was a jubilee year for the Queen of England.
Yes.
So that got a lot of attention in the gutter press, as I like to call them. There's papers like the Sun and the Daily Mirror, and because of this terrible disrespect to the Queen of England, they really, it's almost like they had this policy of trying to drum up violence and resentment towards the punk rock bands that were emerging. And then we all got tarred with the same brush, and everyone seemed to be out for us. The skinheads, there's this weird throwback culture called the Teddy Boys, who I don't know if you know about them, Michaela, but they're a weird throwback to Edwardian days. That's how it began. But they're like Teddy Boys. They have quiff hair, and they were into the sort of Chuck Berry and Bill Haley and all that kind of stuff. For some reason, they resented and hated us. People who were into soul music hated us. People in the military hated us. The police hated us. The politicians hated us. It was, you had to be quite brave actually to go out on the street dressed as in anything that resembled a sort of punk outfit. And I did get jumped on once by the Teddy Boys in Croydon, and they tried to give me a severe beating. And luckily, it was in Surrey Street Market, and a couple of the marketeers came to my rescue with brooms and sort of beat them off me. Well, otherwise, I could have ended up in the hospital or severely damaged. But there were, I knew people who got knifed, and there were people that died. They died because they were punk rockers, and it was a bit of a scary time. And of course, the far right wing hated us, and so when we would go to Germany and places like that, sometimes we would have the far right sort of skin-edged contingent turn up and try to disrupt our gigs and cause fights and try to get to us and threaten us and all this sort of stuff. So yeah, it was a bit hairy at times, but hey, it's all character building,
Yeah. And what do you think now, seeing somebody like Johnny Rotten kind of embrace the American far right after he was such a countercultural figure in England only half a century ago?
I just don't really know what to make of it. I know he's built his whole sort of career on being controversial and saying things to, whip up controversy and whatever, but how he can just suddenly turn around. But some people do. I mean, so some people reach my kind of age, and they and even though throughout their life they've been very liberal, they suddenly get extremely right wing. And I'm at a place now in terms of politics where I don't give myself a kind of I don't say, right, I'm of the left, or I mean, I'd never be of the far right, obviously, and I would, but I'm not of the far left either. I'm kind of, I'm sort of a centrist, really. I'm a liberal sort of centrist.
Okay.
But there are some issues that people say, well, that's a little bit right of centre, and then there are other issues that go, well, that's left of centre. I don't try to sort of give myself a title, in a political title. I don't say, oh, I'm conservative, or I'm a socialist, or I'm a, I listen to the sides, and I decide what I think is the sensible policy, and that's how I roll politically now. That's not to say that there are things that are going on in politics that I rail against. I mean, some of the audience might not like to hear this, but your President Trump I just couldn't understand what was going on. It was like he was whipping up. It was like he was trying to cause a civil war, and this whole thing about any criticism of him was fake news, and any kind of nonsense that bolstered or supported his point of view was the truth. And then you had, news organizations like Fox that would just parrot everything he said, and I found it very scary. I thought it was very scary, and of course, it all led up to that terrible attack when Biden had won the election, fairly had won the election, and then all this nonsense about it's a stitch up. It's no evidence, no proof. Went to court, what was it, 30 times, and each time he failed to prove that this had occurred.
I think that it was even more than that. I mean, it was beyond proven that the election was fair and that Biden won, but it's kind of very, very disturbing, the attack that Donald Trump and his followers have waged on truthful information in our public sphere and in our government. I mean, much like you, I don't define myself in any particular political party or affiliation. It should be based on what you see in the evidence. But yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying about Donald Trump. And I know that, as the son of an immigrant in England at the time, you probably had a unique perspective on politics because you lived in a time that was very anti-immigrant there, unfortunately.
It was very, very much so. And I mean, there's still racism in Britain. It still exists. And it certainly exists in America. I've seen it in its raw form there, and I just don't. I was very scared anyway that Trump would have got a second term. I think if Trump had managed to get a second term, he would have dismantled your democracy and made it an autocracy, not similar to the one Putin has in Russia, or attempted to do that anyway. Luckily, he failed in that. Let's just hope he doesn't come back and tries to resurrect his, because there's enough people who invested so much of their energy and time and belief in that man that whatever he says, they'll believe, and they'll vote for him no matter what he does.
Exactly. I mean, that's what's so disturbing about it. The denial of truth people will go to in order to stress their support for Donald Trump and follow him.
It's almost messianic. It's almost like he's become like a cult leader,
Yes, exactly, and very disturbing.
Yeah, very, very scary. And I am no fan of our present of the Prime Minister of Great Britain at the moment either. He's another one that's very very sketchy with the truth, and some of the facts he quotes are not facts, and he's got away with so much stuff because of this silly bumbling kind of character that he projects. But I cannot stand the man, and I'd like to see a change of government in Britain as well. Get a government that actually cares about the majority of the country rather than taking care of just a wealthy minority.
Exactly. And when you were in the UK subs, you lived in a time that was very reflective of what it is like now, this kind of emphasis on whiteness and on exclusivity in that class, particularly with the era of Margaret Thatcher. Like when you and the other people in the UK subs were making music, were you conscious of that in your writing and in your approach to performing? Like you wanted to cry back against the direction that the country was taking?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we did write songs that had a political dimension, but we also wrote songs about disappointment in romance, and longing and more sort of personal things as well. Living Dead, which is on the song that I wrote the music and the lyrics for, on Endangered Species. Most people think it's a song about zombies, right? But it's not. It's about the way I feel after the breakup of a relationship. You know, because I felt as though I should be feeling something, but I wasn't feeling something. And so I kind of likened it to being a sort of, you know, an emotional zombie. But most people thought it was just an out and out kind of horror story, kind of zombie flick type song, but it wasn't. It wasn't about that at all.
You know, I actually wanted to talk to you about the cover of Endangered Species. Like, I know that you had a concept where you wanted the cover to basically look like a punk, but as like a decaying Egyptian mummy with kind of punk treasures around them. And then you looked at the cover and it was like a day glow thing. Like, describe that to me.
Yeah, well, when we were trying to come up with concepts for the cover for Endangered Species, I'm big on history. I have a degree in history, which I got from what's called the Open University, which is a fantastic organisation. It's always listed in the top 10 universities in the UK. And the reason for that is because you have to be self-motivated. It's for people who work and study simultaneously. So you don't go for 3 years to Oxford or whatever and study there, and then you get your degree. You take your exams and get a degree. You have to study for 6 years, and you have to take an exam every year. And so I've always, anyway, we're getting off the subject. So I've always been big on history, and my father, when I was a boy, used to take me to the British Museum. And they've got an amazing Egyptology section at the British Museum. And I remember one of the exhibits was this 5,000-year-old mummified, you know, he hadn't been swathed in bandages. Basically, sand and time and sun had mummified this man. And he was in like a fetal position. He'd been buried in the fetal position. And they had put, whoever had buried him had put some of his personal objects in there for the afterlife. So there were like pots and a dagger and all this stuff. And then when we came to talk about, you know, ideas for the cover Endangered Species, I went, right, I've got an idea. And I explained this exhibit. And I said, instead of a mummified Egyptian, how about having a punk rocker who's been, the grave has been uncovered 2,000 years in the future, and lying beside them is the sort of the debris and detritus of their era. So in other words, there'd be like a rotting Walkman, and there'd be a sort of a broken guitar, and there would be records sort of crumbling, you know, into dust, and they all went, yeah, that sounds great. So we went to the record company. It's a record company called NEMS, and I went to see the sort of the creative people there, and I explained this, and they went, yeah, that's great. And then we went to the States. We were touring, and the album came out while we were still touring in the States. And I was in Los Angeles, and I went to Tower Records, and I walked to the U section just to see what they had. And there it was, the new UK subs album, Endangered Species. And I lifted it up, and it was completely different to my concept. It was just this day-glow skeleton with a guitar across it. There was none of the sort of elements that I had come up with. They just gone and, you know, lazy. It was just lazy stuff, you know. But weirdly enough, people really like that cover. I can't stand it because I knew it could have been so much better. And,
I mean, I like it, but at the same time, when you told the story of what you really wanted, I'm like, yeah, they should have listened to him and put a little more effort in. But
I think so. But as I say, it's just laziness on their part.
Yeah, exactly. While you mentioned touring in America, it's my understanding that while you were doing that with the UK subs, you actually got to see a performance of Guns N' Roses. What was that like?
Well, when I was playing with Iggy Pop, I played with Iggy Pop. I did a world tour with him, 8 months solid. And during that time, we played Texas Stadium. And how confused the bill is this? In Excess were headlining, Guns N' Roses, us, the Iggy Pop band, Ziggy Marley, who was the son of Bob Marley, was on before us. And there was a band called the Smithereens that opened up the show. It was like 60,000 people or something, 65,000 people. And it was being live on MTV, I remember. And anyway, Guns N' Roses were on that bill. And Andy McCoy was the guitar player in the Iggy Pop band.
Yes.
And along with me, I was the bass player. Seamus Bean, who had been in Madness, was the keyboard player, and Paul Garisto had been in the Psychedelic First as the drummer. And I guess Andy had met Guns N' Roses at an early point of Hanoi's career, probably when they first went over to America. And so Slash and Izzy came to our dressing room to see Andy, and I got talking to them. And yeah, so I obviously I watched their show with interest from the side of the stage, and really enjoyed it. I think at that point they'd been on tour for almost an entire year to promote Appetite for Destruction, and so they looked as though they'd been on tour for a year, but it was still a great show. And I sort of stayed in contact with Izzy, and not so much with Flash, but with Izzy. And in fact, it was Izzy who told me about their intention of doing the down on the farm, of covering Down on the Farm, for the spaghetti incident happened.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you to reiterate that story. Like, I know that they covered it when Izzy was still in the band, but a couple years later, after he and Steven Adler had left and they were doing the spaghetti incident, they chose to put it on that album. Like, can you describe to me what it was like? At first seeing them cover it, and then hearing that it was actually going to be on the record.
Well, the first inkling I had of it was I was playing with Cheap and Nasty. I was still living in London. And I got a phone call from Iggy Pop. And Iggy goes, "Hey, Alvin, it's Jim." I go, "Hey, Jim, how you doing?" He's like, "Yeah. Hey, guess what? I just played this farm aid thing. We're raising money for the farmers that are coming out of business. And Guns N' Roses were on the bill too. And they played a song. And they played one of their own, but they played a UK sub song." I went, "What? You really?" He goes, "Yeah, something about a farm." And I went, "Oh, that'd be Down on the Farm. That's brilliant." So yeah, it sounded really cool too. Yeah, it was really cool too, man. It sounded great. I thought, "Oh, that's brilliant, Jim. Thanks for phoning and telling me about this." I was like really psyched up about it, and that's how I thought that was as far as it was going to go. And then I saw Izzy in London, and he told me, I think he was playing with the Juju Hounds. He had a band called the Juju Hounds.
Yes.
And I went to see him play with Dave Tragana, who has been in an array of bands, and played with Andy in Shooting Gallery and various things. Anyway, I went to see them play, and afterwards I went to Izzy's hotel room, and he said to me, "Oh, they've covered the recording Down on the Farm." And I went, "Wow, that's amazing. That's really amazing." He says, "Yeah, it's I think it's going to come out on this Salute Punk album or whatever." The interesting thing was about all that was I said to him, "Well, how on earth did you even know about that song. And he said, well, when Axel and I first went to Los Angeles from Indiana, we knew this guy, and we went to Los Angeles to start a band and become rock stars. That was our dream. We went and we stayed with this guy, and we slept on the floor. And this guy only had 2 records. He had a Black Flag album, and he had the album Endangered Species. And because it was the only 2 records in the house, we would just like play them relentlessly. One side and the other side, the next record, one side, the first record again. And so we got pretty, we got to really know the material quite well on both those records. And then cut to, they're invited, now they're big rock stars and they're the biggest rock band in the world, and they've been invited to do this Farm Aid, and they're discussing what songs to do. And Axel goes, hey, how about that song Down on the Farm? You remember that one, Izzy, on the UK Subs album? And Izzy goes, yeah, that'd be perfect. And so that's how they came to first play it, choose to play it. And then afterwards, they decided to record it, to add it to the sort of the other songs. One of Brian James's songs, New Roads, I think, is on that album, and others from the punk genre. So yeah, that was. I'm so pleased that guy had 2 records, and one of them was just because it generated some good money for us. Having that on the album. It was also the B-side of Ain't It Fun, the single, one of the singles from the album as well. Yeah.
That's right. Now, do you actually get the gold and platinum records for that?
It's up there.
Oh, cool. I think I see it.
Yeah,
oh, there it is. That is so cool. Oh my gosh. That is awesome.
Yeah, so I mean, it's the only platinum record, but it's very cool. Yeah, that's wonderful. I was so happy that they covered it, and it also brought the UK Subs to the attention of a new audience,
exactly,
and generated a lot more interest in the band and all of that. So yeah, it was a cool thing.
Yeah, Courtney Love actually has a quote that I love. She talks about how she grew up wanting to be as famous as Kurt Cobain wound up being, or as famous as Madonna wound up being. And eventually she said, you know what? If I cannot take the crown, I want to be a reference point for whoever will. Yeah. And that's kind of how I see the UK Subs. I mean, even if they didn't get as much commercial success as I think they deserve, they were still an important reference point for some of those who did,
I like to think that that's the case. Yes, it's nice because you do meet younger musicians who say, oh, I came to see you play at such and such time, and it just I formed a band, and now we've got a record deal, and it's fantastic, to inspire people, even if ultimately they don't achieve the fame that you would want for them. It's still fantastic that your music has managed to somehow inspire and move people to give it a go and try themselves, and to, in the same way as when I saw Mark Bonar and T-Rex, that changed my life, and it wasn't always guaranteed that I'd make it to the point where I could do it professionally for the amount of time I've been doing it, but it gave me the determination to try, and it just happened to work out.
I'm curious. Are you one of those people who always wanted to be a rich and famous musician, or were you just determined to make a living off of it and to be part of the movement that you found in England at the time, which was the punk rock movement?
Well, I think when I first decided to pursue music. Of course, I had fantasies of being in the Rolling Stones or being in a band that was as big as the Stones. But then as you go along and you mature a little bit, I started to see myself more as just like a musician working day. It's my job. It's what I do. I love it. I mean, there's no better job to have than something you enjoy and you love, even though there are aspects of it that are frustrating and difficult and whatever. It's still one of the best jobs in the world. To be paid to travel and to play to large amounts of people, and you go to places like Brazil and people know who you are. It's like, how do you know who I am? You shouldn't know who I am. And it's very humbling in some ways. I, of course, never made it to that level. I'd had tastes of it with Iggy and whatever, and but never made it to that level. But nevertheless, I've always, for a long time now, made a good living from it. I have a lovely house here in the south of France, a house that I could never aspire to own in the UK, but I can afford to have this house here. I have a great, I live in a lovely part of the world. I travel. I'm good friends with everyone in the band. We have people that follow us all around the world, and when we do a European tour, there's a number of people that will just go from city to city and follow us, and it's fantastic. But yeah, I just see myself now as just someone who's I'm just a working guy who happens to can write a song and plays bass in the UK subs. That's it.
Cool. Alrighty. So describe to me the process of transitioning from the UK subs to being part of the Iggy Pop band. Like, I know that your first part of being in the UK subs didn't end on the best of terms, but then eventually you got a call from Andy McCoy asking you to be part of the Iggy Pop band. What was that like?
Yeah, well, Andy. It's a weird thing with me and Andy. It's been a sort of love-hate relationship, really. But,
you have a lot of people in his life, apparently. Yeah.
But I have to say this about Andy. He's always been, he gave me a fantastic opportunity with Iggy. I nearly joined Hanoi Rocks. In fact, I went and played with Hanoi Rocks as an audition, but Andy wasn't there because Andy was more interested in other things, shall we say? And I had, exactly. And I got on the phone to him and just basically said, look, there I was playing with your band, and you didn't even have the decency to turn up and play. And of course, no one ever calls Andy out or has a go. But because of the nature of our relationship, Hanoi Rocks was the support band to the UK subs in 1981 when we first went to Scandinavia. So that's how I got to know Andy and Mike and Hanoi Rocks. And so because of how we met, it's kind of, I was the guy kind of on top, and he always showed me a lot more respect than he would show for other people. Let's put it that way. Okay. But I called him out on this, you see, and he didn't like it. And we had this sort of I write about this in volume 2 of my memoirs.
Yes.
And and in the end, he obviously thought I was poking my nose into something I shouldn't be, and I didn't end up playing Hanoi Rocks. Let's put it that way. But then I went after I left the subs, I went to Los Angeles and I played with a couple of bands, and we were doing the clubs and everything. And one of them, the band just prior to playing with Iggy was called Broken Glass, and we got a record deal with Chrysalis Records.
That's right. And
I knew Andy had turned up in LA, and I'd also heard these terrible stories about him borrowing instruments for people, and then they would walk down the street and see them in a pawn store, in the window of a pawn store. And I thought, oh God, you know. So I said to people who would say, oh, Andy wants to get hold of you. He knows you're in LA. He's in LA. Don't give him my number. You know, don't want to know. I don't. You know, one of the reasons I left London was to get away from all the that chunky nonsense. You know, because there's a lot of people who were getting into it in London, and I just didn't. I hate that truck. And but obviously someone gave me my telephone number, and I picked up the phone one morning and said, "Hey, Alvin, Andy here, cool, you're in," you know. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I'm in, yeah, hello, how you doing?" He's like, "Oh man, yeah, you know," it's like, "Oh, yeah, I'm playing with Iggy Pop now. How would you like to be the bass player?" And I'm like, drugs have destroyed his brain, you know. I was like, yeah, get me a gig with the Stones, and you know, that'd be cool too. You know, why don't you do that? And he's like, no, man, really? No, it's true. I'm going to come. Give me your address. I'll come round. I'm going. Oh no, I don't. And then I went, okay, all right. Here's my address. Thinking that would be it. You know, he would nod off, and I wouldn't hear from him again for another 5 years or something.
Yeah.
But then there was just banging at the door, and there he was, and he's like, "Hey, come on, we're going to meet Jim." I was like, "Jim?" He goes, "Yeah, Iggy, man, you know, he likes you to call him Jim, you know." So I said, "Okay, let's go." And sure enough, I met Iggy Pop. We chatted, and without having to play a note, I was in the Iggy Pop band on We Say So. So he did me a really, you know, he did me a major favour there, and I will always be grateful to Andy for that. You know. But I will say this for Andy: he always treated me differently to other people because he knew he couldn't get away with it. You know, if he tried any shit with me, I would, you know, I'd make sure he knew that he'd gone too far, and he better, you know, just back off, you know. And so I think he respected that, and I certainly respected his talent as a guitar player, and but you know, it's not binary, is it? You don't have to. In order to be very talented, you don't have to be an arsehole as well. You know, it's like, and it was strange with Andy because he could be so charming and wonderful, and we could have such a great time. And then next thing you know, he's trying to do, you know, he's giving me a crack pipe to hold on 42nd Street while he goes off looking for crack. And I'm like, what? Andy, if I get caught with this, I'm going to, oh man, come on, I'll be back in, you know. And then doesn't turn up, and I've got this crack pipe. And then I go back to my hotel room at the Mayflower, and this is with Iggy. And at like 2 in the morning, there's bang bang, and there's Andy with the most dodgiest, like, a crack dealer you've ever seen, wanting to gain entry to do crack in my room. And I'm taking your room. What the, you know? And he's like, "Oh man, don't be like that. I'll go out." Oh, you know. And then other times he'd just be like, yeah, the sweetest person and nice, and you know, and we'd have a lot of fun, and you know. But yeah, he's a very strange man, is Andy. I don't know. He could have been like one of the greats, you know, but unfortunately he allowed his addictions to become more important than his talent.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I say about Andy is that if he had played his cards differently, he probably could have had the kind of career after Hanoi Rocks that Eric Clapton had after Cream. But clouds got in the way, unfortunately. So
yeah, he had a different agenda, you know, and he tried to clean himself up numerous times. I mean, I'm hoping, I don't know much about him now. I see odd bits on YouTube and on Facebook and this and that. I get, you know, people that I know that know him tell me stuff. and it seems as though he's sort of sorted himself out now, and I hope that stays, stays that way, because there's been a lot of times when he's cleaned up, gone to rehab, and then he's back on it, and then everything goes wrong. And anyway, having said that, I mean, I still, if I went to Scandinavia and I ran into him, I would be more than happy to sit down and have a beer with him and talk about old times.
All right. So describe how you went from being in the Iggy Pop band to joining Cheap and Nasty.
Right. So the interesting thing is, one of I talked about Broken Glass as being the band just prior to my joining the Iggy Pop band, but the band in LA that I joined when I first moved to LA was called Revolver, and it was a three-piece band. And then the guitar player, Isaac Bruce, decided that he wanted another guitar player because he was singing and playing guitar, and it was like he wanted someone to bolster the guitar, make the sound thicker, and give him a break so he didn't have to play the lead. So he got in this guitar player called Timo Kalkio.
Mm-hmm.
And so Timo became the guitar player. And that's how I first met Timo. Well, actually, it's not. I first met Timo back in London in about '83, when he was roadieing and driving for Hanoi Rocks.
Yes.
That's when I first met him. But this was the first time I met him as a musician. And he stayed. Him and his then girlfriend came and lived at my house, my flat in LA for a while, because they were living in a car. I just couldn't. I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, we're trying to save up money, to get a place of our own. I said, well, you can't live in a car with your girl. Come and stay with my then wife. Come and stay with me and my Mary, who I was married to at the time. And we got a pull-down couch in the lounge. Stay there until you get the money to move out. And so I did. He stayed for a few months, and that's how I got to know him. And I just thought he was the sweetest, kindest, loveliest bloke I met. He was just a sweetheart, and he was a really good guitar player too. But unfortunately, he got sacked from the band because he went off with some friends from LA Guns, I think it was, or one of those bands who were mates to this. And we had done the soundtrack. We're playing at Madame Wong's, which was sort of the punky kind of venue at the time. Black Flag had played there. And, I think the Police had played there. So it was a big gig, we were. It's like, and these friends of his turned up after soundcheck, and he went off with them. And then when he came back, he was incapable of playing. He was in such a state. And in the end, I got this guy who sort of roaded for us to unplug Timo. And Timo didn't even realize he was unplugged. So he kept sort of doing this stuff and doing all these poses, nothing coming out of his hand. And then afterwards, I said, I can't, we've got to get rid of him. We can't have this. And I said,
wow.
Going, well, give him another chance. He's going, no, I can't do it. No, man, no, he's got to go. And that was a shame. It was a real shame. But then I decided to go. Well, I didn't decide to go back to London after Iggy Pop. My wife had had enough of LA. She hated it, and she wanted to go back to London. And I thought that in order to basically save our marriage, this is what I needed to do. Mm-hmm. And I got a telephone call from Nasty Suicide. Saying, hey, Alvin, what are you doing? You're not playing with Iggy at the moment. I said, no, I'm sort of on standby, but I'm not doing anything. He said, well, I'm getting this band together called Cheap and Nasty, and I've got a guitar player and I've got a drummer, but we haven't got a bass player. You'd have to move to London. I thought, oh, okay, well, this is a great opportunity, because this way my wife will be happy. I've got work to go straight into when I get back, And
Yeah.
that's how I ended up in Cheap and Nasty. And of course, we got a record deal very quickly, and we were off touring, and we made the first album. Um, and that's when I really got to know Nasty and Les Riggs and Timo, and it was great. I loved it. I really enjoyed it. It was great fun. We had some great times, and we made two really good records. I think the second record's better than the first, but two very good records. And we had that beautiful Disaster single. I thought was a great single. That was a collaboration between myself and Timo. And some other great songs on there that Nasty had written, and it was brilliant. But that lasted for 4 years, and then that came to an end. I think Nasty wanted to leave the UK, and for personal reasons, and he was offered a job with Mike Monroe's band. So he went off and did that. Lived in Japan for a while, and then moved up back to Finland. But yeah, it was great. I love that band, Cheap and Nasty. I thought we were really good. I saw some YouTube stuff recently of a festival we did in Finland about 91 or 92. And it's really great. In fact, I messaged Jan Nasty and said, mate, I've just watched this, and I knew we were good, but I didn't realise we were that good, and it
Yeah,
was
you
great.
had wonderful chemistry on stage together. I've seen that video too.
Yeah, it was not. I mean, we all had our roles, and Nasty was I thought Nasty was a great frontman because he wasn't all like whoa, and crazy and whatever. It was all understated, but cool. He took his moments to sort of stride out to the front and play a credible solo, and then he'd be back on the mic and singing. And Timo, Timo's rock and roll made flesh. I mean, the man's just like he's, the guy Keith Richards wished he was. Les was a fantastic drummer, and they were all, what I liked about them, they were all intelligent. You could talk about a lot of different things. It wasn't just sex, drugs, and rock and roll. You could talk about like some bands. You talk about they're all educated and smart people, and I like that about them. And it was a great time. And the terrible tragedy about it is we were going to do a reunion record, and we had like a Zoom conference like this, and we talked about it and how we were going to do it, and I had a record company ready to go with it. And then, of course, the tragic news came that Timo passed away, which was very, very upsetting.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew he had been ill. I knew he had health problems, but I didn't realise the extent. And it came as a real terrible shock when I found out that he had died. And I was just like, wow! I just couldn't believe it.
Same here. I had no idea that he was ill in that way. Like I knew that he had moved back to Finland and that he'd recently stopped drinking, but I had no idea that he was about to pass away. So it was horrible shock, and I was really sad too. And I was sad for all of you guys. I felt like he had so much that he wanted to do still, and I'm really sad for all of you that you didn't get to have that reunion together.
Yeah, I'm sure it would have been a great record. We were sending each other little bits of music that we'd recorded, and Nasty had started writing some stuff, and Timo had written a couple of songs. And I said, I sort of messaged Timo back and said, "This sounds great. Can I have a write the lyrics?" And he's like, "Yeah, man, you do it." And we were starting to get, plan it all out how we were going to do it, and then unfortunately that was all, that it didn't happen because of Timo, and none of us after that really wanted to do it, because though we are talking about doing a sort of tribute to Timo, raising some money for a charity on his behalf. So
That'll be wonderful.
Yeah, we've been talking to his girlfriend Becky about this, and so we're still in the process of sorting that out. But it won't be the same as having like a proper Cheap and Nasty reunion record. You know, that would have been fantastic. It really would have been great. And I was hopeful that thereafter we could do some dates. You know, we could get together and promote it in the States. Do some, 5 or 6 shows in the UK, in Scandinavia. It would have been great. Japan, but it wasn't to be. Very, very sad. Yeah.
It is sad, and I still miss Timo, and I know that all of you guys do too. He was a
Oh
great
yeah.
guy.
Yeah. I think about him a lot. You know, I think about him a lot because he genuinely was one of the sweetest, nicest, kindest people. You know, I've ever met. You know, people are supposed to say nice things about him to pass it, but in Timo's case, it's absolutely true. He was. And he was a great musician. He was a great guitar player, and it's a terrible loss for music as well as for on a personal level. You know,
Exactly. Yep. But I feel like you guys appreciated him while he was alive, and that's the important thing. And
yeah, and I think he appreciated us as friends. I mean, when I moved to France, I didn't get to see Timo as much as I would have liked to, because he was still in London up until when he moved to Finland.
mm-hmm.
But he did come when I released my solo record, the Disobedient Servants album, or Your Disobedient Servant album. We did a showcase gig at the 100 Club in London, and he came on stage and played a song with me.
Which I've seen the videos for. You guys did great.
Yeah, and it was fantastic to have him up there and joining us. And I would occasionally meet him for dinner with his girlfriend Becky and drinks. But I just really had no clue as to the extent of what was going on with his health until much later. And then I thought everything was okay because he had moved to Finland, change of life. He was getting out of. I mean, he had some friends in London that were sort of druggy, drinky types, and I thought, well, he's gone to Finland. But then I heard we was going to get together with Andy McCoy to do something. And I thought, oh no. But then, yeah. But then I guess it just caught up with him, and it just finally. Well, it was beyond repair. Let's put it.
Yeah, it's tragic and still sucks. Again, I had a couple of things that I was planning to do with him as well. Like we were going to do a book proposal for Beautiful Disaster for the 33 and a Third book series, and we didn't get to do that together. But do you read the 33 and the Third books, by the way?
No.
It's a book series, and basically they have a bunch of different books in the series, and each book focuses on one album. They've done everything from the Ramones to the Beatles to Kanye West, and I wanted to do a book proposal on Beautiful Disaster, the album from Cheap and Nasty, and Timo loved the idea, and we were gonna kind of work on it after the pandemic had subsided, but then the pandemic happened, and pretty much, and a lot of that was put on hold. And I, of course, didn't know how sick Timo was, and then he passed away. So
yeah, I don't think many people knew how sick he was. I don't Nasty knew how sick he was. Les, we knew he'd had health problems, but none of us really knew the extent. There was a few people that knew, but obviously they kept it to themselves, understandably. But yeah, that's why it was such a shock, because we've been talking and messaging, and everything seemed to be sort of going good for him, and then suddenly he's no longer with us. It's just like, what? But I've had quite a few friends, unfortunately, die recent years. I suppose that's what happens when you reach the age I've got to. You end up people. Start dying on you, and it's awful. And yeah, that was that was the worst for me. Tinoco. Yeah.
On a slightly less tragic note, how did you feel about the way Cheap and Nasty were perceived in their time? Like, did you feel like the music media in America and Japan and England gave you a fair shot, or did it come at a time when grunge had kind of taken over the market and there were too many comparisons to Hanoi Rocks on top of that?
I think, yeah, I think what happened was we fell between two storms. Grunge had come along, and we were a bit, we and we didn't really fit in with. We were outside. The thing with Gymnastic, it was an outsider band. We didn't fit in really with the Motley Crue thing or the Poison, and it wasn't. We weren't a big hair band, and we weren't Enough's Enough or anything like that.
Yeah.
And so we couldn't easily get in with that audience. We weren't grunge, we weren't punk, we weren't solidly blues. We were just sort of, it was just Cheap and Nasty's music. It wasn't. Yeah, it had roots in the sort of Hanoi Rocks kind of style of things, but even then, it was different, a lot different from Hanoi Rocks, and we all brought different elements, which made it different. And I thought that's what I loved about Cheap and Nasty. We were different, and we even dressed differently. We used to wear suits on stage, and it was. It was just cool. For me, it was cooler. We were a cool band. I think that was the problem. We couldn't. There wasn't an audience for us really. There was the ex-Hanoi fans that would come along, and there was people that were into rock music, and people that knew about my career and whatever would come along. But it wasn't really a big enough audience. We couldn't progress beyond that. We did tour in Japan, and that was fantastic. That was really good. But there again, that was kind of a lot of ex-Hanoi fans coming to see this new Hanoi Rock spin-off band, see what we were like. But yeah, it was that was it. We were just out, we didn't fit in anywhere, which was commercially a weakness, but I think musically a strength.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Like, do you feel in retrospect though that people really appreciate it as a band and that it's aged in a good way for the audience that it did find?
I think a lot of people have rediscovered that Cheap and Nasty as the musical entity through YouTube and Spotify and through the finding the records and whatever at record fairs and this and that, and I've come to appreciate it a lot more now and see the quality in what we were doing. This happens with bands. I mean, there's a lot of bands that were from the 70s that I used to go and see and think were fantastic or whatever, but they had a very limited audience. And then years later, everyone's raving about this cult band that how brilliant they were. And I was like, I was saying that in 1974, for God's sake. So yeah, it's a bit like that. We've sort of become a cult rock band, and that's all right. That's good. It's good that we've managed to obtain that sort of appreciation. It's what it is. You just gotta you do your best. You play, you do shows, you put everything you can into it to make it work. And if you don't make it to a level that you would like to make it to, then the thing folds or whatever, you move on and you do the next thing and you try again and you keep going. I said, it's the work ethic. in me. That's what it is. It's work. I mean, I love those times. I'm very nostalgic about those times. Some great stories to be had from those times, mainly involving Timo, actually. But you know, Chip were a great band, but it didn't work commercially, and so there wasn't the money there to keep it going, and the Nasty wanted to do something different, and it was called Cheap and Nasty. Nasty leaves, that's half the band name has gone. You can't keep going as Cheap and Nasty. The Nasty's not there. So that was the other thing. But yeah, no, we gave it a shot, and it was great. And I don't regret a moment of my time with that band. They were fantastic.
This is just sort of a nerdy music fan question, but as somebody who was part of one of the great punk bands in British history, what did you think of grunge when it came along? And I mean, Kurt Cobain, for instance, was influenced by a lot of British punk bands and even lifted from them, like Killing Joke. Did you enjoy bands like Nirvana or the grunge?
Absolutely fantastic. I loved it. It was a breath of fresh air. I really loved it. I loved that a band could take. I mean, let's face it, rock music is just a repetitive form. It's like a simplistic, repetitive form, right? And to be able to re-energize it in the way they did, I thought was absolutely fantastic. And I love their records. I love when I started to see them on television. I just thought this, smells like teen spirit. When I saw that video, I was like, man, if I was 16 or 17 again, that would have been my Mark Bolan moment.
Cool.
Yeah, I know. I thought they were absolutely terrific, and like with Courtney's Hull and whatever. I love that too. I mean, I thought it's just great. Yeah. I mean, you'd be surprised. I play a lot of different music. I mean, jazz, classical. I mean, I just love music. So I play a lot of. I'm an omnivore when it comes to music. I'm not one of these people who just plays a certain genre of music and whatever. I love all music. And me, they were like the Ramones of the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s.
Mm-hmm. It's really cool. Alrighty, so describe getting back into the UK subs. Did you feel, after Cheap and Nasty ended, you got back with the subs? Did you feel like you'd turned a corner and the band had gotten to a place where you had better communication and appreciated each other more?
Yes. Well, Charlie phoned me up and asked me to do some shows. So when the bass player had at the time couldn't make it or was otherwise engaged. So I sort of tipped my toe in that way. And then Nicky Garrett had his own record company. He was living in San Francisco at that time. And 96, sorry. And he phoned up and said he wanted to do a reunion record with Charlie and myself. And the drummer who's on Endangered Species, Steve Roberts. But Charlie and I had to explain to Nicky that Steve Roberts was in no shape to make a record. So he got a drummer from a Californian band, Dave Eyre, a really good drummer, who unfortunately has passed away as well. And we went, Charlie and I flew to San Francisco. We made what turned out to be 2 records from Central and Riot. And then the following year, we toured those records with the subs around North America. And then I got ill. I got a neurological illness. and it took me. I was out of action for 2 years. It took me 2 years to recover from it.
Wow.
I won't bore you with the details, but basically, I got a flu virus, and because I was on tour in America, my immune system was quite low, and so the virus took hold. And then when I went back to the UK and rested, my immune system came back up, and the immune system has a memory, and it went, oh, there's that flu virus we didn't take care of, we've got to get it. So it was like an autoimmune disease. It started to attack the myelin in my body, which is the insulation for the nerves. And I ended up, basically all my muscles withered away. I couldn't walk, I could hardly speak. I ended up at the Royal Free Hospital. And they figured out, after a bunch of unpleasant tests, they found out what it was. And then put me on this immunoglobulin stuff night and day. It was these infusions night and day, which make you really sick. But they pumped me full of new antibodies, which killed off the old antibodies that were misbehaving. And then they put me on immune suppressants. And then I had to go to physiotherapy to get my muscles back and to learn how to walk again and to speak properly again. And it took me 2 years to make a full recovery. And then I went immediately back on the road with the subs for this tour called Social Chaos in '99. And I was, of course, I was worried. I thought, oh, I could end up getting ill again, but I was fine. You know, I was good. I've been cured. You know, but I needed to prove to myself that I could do that. So.
Well, I'm glad you recovered. First of all, that sounds awful. Just it's great that you were able to pull through it. My goodness.
Yeah, well, the weird thing was, when people would come to see me, they would like burst into tears because I was in such bad shape. A lot of people thought I was going to die, but I never did. I always had complete confidence I was going to be okay, and it was nothing more than just stupidity on my part, or bloody-mindedness, or I don't know what you would call it. But there was something I just said to myself, I'm going to be all right. I'll be okay. And I held on to that belief, and it got me through it, really. And,
yeah, that's certainly the right attitude to have in that circumstance.
I think you need to have that, you know, even you just have to say to yourself, it's going to be all right. Just get on with it. You're going through a terrible time, but you're going to come out of this. And I was also very lucky that the Royal Free Hospital in Hampstead, because I was living in West Hampstead, so I was close. I lived close. That was my local hospital. It was one of the best neurological hospitals in Europe. You know?
Oh, thank goodness.
So I had some fantastic doctors, and the people that worked there were amazing. You know, they were really smart, and they were really caring, and they were just fantastic.
And I'm glad that you were able to get healthcare just anywhere in Britain. I mean, we have good doctors here in America, but the costs are astonishing, and it's just very prohibitive for anyone who wants to get good healthcare. So I'm glad you were in England. If that had to happen, it's good you were in England when it did. Well,
absolutely. I mean, this immunoglobulin stuff they were giving me was costing something like £15,000 per bag of immunoglobulin, and they were giving me 2 or 3 bags of that a day, right? So I was in there for 4 weeks, nearly 5 weeks. You imagine how much that would have, the bill that would have come to.
No kidding.
When it comes to the health system, the National Health Service in Britain, I'm a socialist. You know, I mean, that's something I am socialist about. I think it's absolutely amazing that rich or poor, you can go and get healthcare, free healthcare, and good healthcare, and that's all paid for by contributions, national insurance contributions by everybody in the country. And I just think it's great. It's wonderful. And I mean, when I was living in the States, of course, I had to get health insurance. You know, just the most basic form of health insurance. But because I mean, I know there are people that have lost their houses, they'd have to sell their houses to pay for their children. One of their children got very sick, and they have to.
Yeah, I know people who literally have a hard time buying houses because partly because they have to pay so much for their health care or their health insurance. And it's quite tragic for my generation in particular, but that's a whole nother story.
Yeah, that's a long different. That's a different long conversation.
Exactly, but at the same time, I'm glad you were able to get that healthcare in England.
Well, thank you, Michaela. Yeah, I was certainly in the right place for that illness anyway, and I'm at the right hospital. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And okay, so after you got with the UK subs, that's also kind of when you turned to writing. Now, what spurred that? What made you want to be a writer?
Well, I was going through my first divorce, and I was, I was quite depressed, and I was drinking too much, and not in a good place. And so I thought I needed something to sort of focus on and to kind of re-engage me with something creative again. And I came up with the idea about writing about my 8 months on the road with Iggy Pop. So I wrote a chapter and just a synopsis of the book and whatever. And the last manager of Cheap and Nasty, just prior to Nasty toning it in and going, "Oh, I'm leaving the band and going to play with Mike," he had a friend who was a published author. So he said, "Look, I'll arrange the lunch. We'll go over to his house and we'll show him what you've got, and we'll just get his feedback." And he read it and said, "This is great. I want to read more. You've got kind of an engaging style. Well, this is really good." And then he very kindly also said, "Look, I'll take this, if you want me to, I'll take it to my publishers and show them, see if they're interested." And they were. And so the result, that was the first edition of it should have been called Some Weird Sin. That's what I wanted it to be called. But it was called, they decided to call Neighborhood Threat on Tour with Iggy Pop. And so that came out. And then, and it has since been republished twice. Came out again as Neighborhood Threat in 2000 with a company called Codex. And then about 3 years ago, Vive Le Rock magazine have a publishing arm, and they put it out with the title I originally wanted it to be, Some Weird Sin on Tour with Iggy Pop. So that was my first book. And then I wrote a terrible book called Destroy, which was sort of a history of punk, and it's awful. And if you see a copy, buy it and burn it, please.
Okay. What's so bad about it? I mean,
it's just awful. It's just awful. I'd sort of succumbed back to depression and over drinking, and it's just the ramblings of a depressed drunk. And now a load of people go, "Wow, I really want to read that." Because that's the sort of perverse reaction you get when you say something. But yeah, it's really bad. So let's skip over that. But it was published by the same by Britannia Press, which was the company that did the Iggy book. And then I always had the idea of sort of writing about my career and all the adventures and stories and everything. And so there was these guys that basically have a record company that put out the Simon Matter records, that put out the Obedient Servants records, and Mark and Rob. And I spoke to them and told them that I wanted to do this, and they said, "We'll publish it." I said, "But you're a record company. Well, we'll form a publishing company and put it out. We think it's great." So they did, and Coleman Meter Publishing, they call it. And So volume, it originally was just going to be one book. But as I started to write, I realized that, it's like, the book would be like this, it'd be like War and Peace, the Bible, Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, all put together. Because, you would need to go to a gym just to pick it up. And I just thought, no. So we decided it would be volume 1 and it would end where I leave the subs. Volume 2 is where I go to LA, I end up playing with Iggy Pop, come back to London, play with Cheap and Nasty, finish this with Nasty leaving the band. And I'm working on volume 3 now, which will take the story right up to the present. So, but man, volume 1 sold out. It was Vive La Rock's book of the year. It's got amazing reviews. Henry Rollins wrote the foreword for it.
Yes.
Volume 2 is doing really well. Got once again fantastic reviews in all the magazines and all the online magazines and everything. It's been fantastic. It's been great. And with COVID and the 2 years where I couldn't go out and play with the subs, unable to tour, it's been a boon. It's like it's brought in income and also writing. It's given me something to do, a discipline every day to write. And so I'm working on volume 3. I'm about halfway through that, so that should be published at the. This will be the final volume. Volume 3 will be the final volume, but it's called Diminished Responsibility: My Life as a UK Sub and Other Strange Stories. That's the title of the.
I wanted to praise you for the writing because, for one thing, I think that you are genuinely a wonderful memoirist and a great writer. Very descriptive, and when and how to tell a good story. But just generally, I'm impressed by the fact that you wrote these yourself, because I know that a lot of public figures turn to ghostwriters to finish those for them. And as a writer myself, I feel like that's a bit of a tragedy, because even if the person is not technically the best writer, it's still good to hear their story in their voice with their point of view. And I applaud you for doing that.
Well, thank you. A lot of people have said to me what they like about my writing is they feel as though they're there with me, that I'm the kind of, I guess some of my writing is kind of filmic in a way, it's, I see it, it's almost like I don't, it's not so much literature as it's almost like a movie script, and I see it that kind of way, when I write. And I try to do it that way, and you have to have the balance of things in there. And I love trying to make things echo at in the beginning, at the end, and trying to include these things. I mean, I'm an amateur. Well, I am, I suppose, technically a professional writer because I get paid and whatever, but I still feel as though I'm an amateur writer. And I'm learning all the time about writing, but I've also written 2 historical novels, very different, but those will see the light of day eventually. But obviously, very different genres to this. So,
just curious, what period does your historical novel that you're writing take place in?
Well, the first historical novel I wrote is called Vespasian Deeds, and it's. Have you ever heard of the Hellfire Club?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Have I ever heard
the
of
Hellfire Club?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. So in the 18th century, basically what happened, if you were the son of an aristocrat or a squire or whatever, you came from the elite, you would go to Eton and then you would go to Oxford or Cambridge, and then your finishing school would be what they would call the Grand Tour. So you would go to France, and you would learn the language, and you would learn to fence, and you would learn to dance, and then you would go to Italy, and you learn all about classical architecture and art, and and then you go to Greece and you learn all that Greek classical history, and then you would come back and you would be a complete man. That was the idea behind it, right? So one
kind
of
of
the
make you a Renaissance man.
yes, so you know, and you would have romances along the way, and you would learn about the arts of love and all this stuff.
Yes.
And so this real historical character, Francis Dashwood, he started a club for people that had been on the Grand Tour, and they would meet at this tavern called the George and Vulture Tavern. What a great name! And they would meet every month, and they would tell stories about their exploits and their adventures on the Grand Tour. And eventually, this it's called the Dilettanti Club, and eventually this morphed into something a bit more, a bit more sinister. It eventually morphed into what was known as the Hellfire Club, and they got into the occult, and they got into political intrigue, and it's a fantastic story, and it's all historically true. So Vespasian Deeds is my invented character that becomes a member of the Hellfire Club, and tells the story of how he becomes a member and what they did. And there's sort of a murder mystery thing running through it as well. And so that was my first novel, and then my second novel was set in the medieval period, and it's about the Children's Crusade. I don't know if you know anything about the Children's Crusade.
The what? I'm sorry.
The Children's Crusade.
The Children's Crusade.
Yeah.
Not really. What's that?
Well, it's not many people know about it, and because there's not a lot of written. Sort of from the period, there's not a lot of stuff that was written about it. Because it was a disaster, basically. What happened was, in the 12th century, there'd been 3 crusades, and the first crusade to take Jerusalem back from the Christian world had succeeded, and then there was a second and third crusade which failed, and so people started to question why, if God's on our side, why hasn't he given us Jerusalem back? Why have our lords and our kings and our knights failed in trying to do it? And this boy came out of nowhere, Stephen Clue, and started to preach. And the reason was because they were all corrupt and sinners and terrible people, and God wasn't going to give Jerusalem to a load of corrupt knights and lords and whatever. And so he said that God had given him a vision in which he was told to collect to him an army of the innocent, of children. And what they were going to do was, this army of children would then go to Jerusalem, and the Sultan would be so moved by seeing them that he would, without any violence, without any bloodshed, he would turn over Jerusalem to the children. And he went from town to town, village to village around France. And eventually he had like 20,000 children that were following him. And I won't go into all the details of what happened, but it's one of the great tragedies in medieval history. One of the great betrayals, let's just put it that way. So that's what that book's about, and it's called The Sultan's General, and it's written from the point of view of one of the child crusaders who ends up in slavery, as they all did, and becomes a general to an Egyptian sultan, and then he goes back and tells the story of how he became the Sultan's general.
I love the sound of that. That is so cool.
Yeah, I have high hopes for both, but they're different genres, so it's going to be harder to find a publisher. Though I think some of the Meta guys said they would want to publish certainly the Vespasian Deeds one, because it's like Baroque and roll, isn't it? It's like 18th century rock stars in powdered wigs. It's great.
Yeah. You know, a little side note, I'll probably edit this part out, but I'm actually descended from Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the women who went on crusade.
He did.
Yeah.
And in fact, this area was all her land.
That's right. You're in France.
Yeah, yeah. This southwest where I am, this is Aquitaine, and this once belonged to England.
That's right. Yeah. Now, when I know that you've been to the Louvre a couple of times, and I know this is a bit of a tangent, but have you ever seen the vase that Eleanor of Aquitaine owned that's now sitting in the Louvre?
I have. Well, I probably have. But I don't recall. I don't recall it. But maybe I have.
It's the one object that we know for sure that she actually owned at some point in her life that is still in existence. She brought it with her from Aquitaine to Paris when she wed the Dauphin of France originally. And again, pretty much nothing else of her belongings survive, but that's sitting in the Louvre now. So.
Oh, yeah, that's amazing. Have you read a book called She Wolves, which is all about the? You must seek it out. Google it when we finish our conversation, and it's all about the fiery women queens, you know, who were the real power behind the kings, and one of the chapters is about Eleanor of Aquitaine and her influence, and what a great political operator she was, and how strong and powerful she was, and how she basically had her children were a dynasty, the Plantagenets, you know, and it's fantastic. And she, at one point in it, and this is all historically, it's not fiction, it's historical truth. She had an affair with her uncle, who was the king of Jerusalem.
Really?
Yeah, she slept with him. You know, she was a smart woman. She knew how to get ahead, you know. And she slept with her uncle, who was king of Jerusalem. This was before she met Henry and became the Queen of England. And it's really interesting because 2 pages later, the head of her uncle is being carried to a sultan in a silver box. And I love things like that, you know, those little details of history. You know, the fact that his head was carried to a sultan in a silver box. And that's really cool.
Yeah. I know that she, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was saying you would love it. It's about these really strong, fiery queens of.
I'll pick it up. It's called She Wolves.
From She Wolves. I think the very last queen in it is Elizabeth I, who is considered one of the great English monarchs. You know, and she was incredibly strong and powerful, and would not take any truck from it. Actually, never married because she never wanted to share power.
Exactly. Alrighty, so back to music. Eventually you started the Disobedient Servants. And what was it like being the front man of the band after having been an equal player for so many years in so many other projects?
Oh, scary. It was like, you know, I still feel very uncomfortable about it. And you know, I don't think my voice is very good or anything like that. I think the record's pretty good and everything, but sometimes my voice is okay, and sometimes my voice is not so okay. So yeah, it was very scary, but it seemed that people seemed to like it. You know, we did a tour just before COVID, the summer before COVID hit, and it was really good, and we got a lot of people along. We played at the big Rebellion Festival in Punk Festival, and that was fantastic. We went down extremely well. Yeah, it was different, you know. It was. I just wanted to see if it was possible, if I could do it, and, you know. And I was always very reluctant to do a solo record because I thought it lacked of kind of ego, and you know, look at me, I've got my, you know, it's I just, so for a long time I resisted it, and then Charlie said to me, you should do a record, you know, your songs are really good and everything. And when we were touring Europe, there was the promoter there, Christoph. He used to. I became very good friends with him over the years, and he always used to say to me, "You should do a solo record. People in Poland love your songs. They think they're very much sort of rock '77 punk songs, and they're really cool."
Hmm.
And I was, "No, I don't know. It's just sounds like self-gratification and just not really a good." Oh no, you should, you should. And in the end, I thought, why? I'll give it a go. Let's see what happens. And I had a whole bunch of songs that I hadn't used for the subs and some new songs I'd written, and then this company, Time and Matter, who then became my book publishing company as well. They said we'll put it out, and they did, and once again, very successful and great reviews, and it's all been very good.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, with COVID, it all stalled, and then Jamie Oliver was the drummer in the Defeated Seventh as well as the UK subs, but we had to let Jamie go, so he no longer wanted to be in the Defeated Seventh, understandably. So yeah, I'm just sort of looking around for a drummer now to get it back up and running again. Maybe do a record towards the end of the year. Do some shows over here in France just to warm up, and then get back to doing a tour or two next year.
Nice. Now, you said that Charlie Harper was quite supportive of doing it. Did that mean a lot to you hearing that from him? Because I know that you guys had your ups and downs sometimes,
Yeah,
but he's been kind of your singer and your frontman for a while. Did it mean a lot to get that encouragement from him?
absolutely. But yeah, I'll say this about Charlie. He's yeah, he can be difficult at times. Well, in the past, I mean, he's so much better to work with now, and it's we've always been friends. But I think our friendship has grown exponentially in recent years. And but he's always been very encouraging. He's always been quite an encouraging person. He's always said, "Yeah, you're good. Do it. Whatever." And it was lovely. And I on the album, I thanked him as I did Christoph, the Polish promoter, for giving me the confidence to try it, and it seems to have paid off. I'm still really nervous about fronting the band. I'd like to get somebody in who can sort of do half and half with it. In the way like the Clash, like Joe Strummer would sing a song, then Mick Jones would sing a song, and
Yeah.
Strummer would sing two songs, and then Paul Simon might sing one song, and then Mick Jones. Yeah, I'd rather it was like that, So I'm thinking about sort of jigging that around a little bit. So I'm not just the front man the whole time. And it's really difficult to play bass and sing. It's like yes, I mean multitasking. Because with the subs, apart from backing vocals, I can just concentrate on playing. And then suddenly it's like you're trying to remember the lyric and what's the next line, and I've got to play bass as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I saw the performance that you guys did at the 100 Club with Timo, and you seemed so energized. You had great chemistry on stage. I really enjoyed watching that performance.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it does work sometimes. Sometimes it can be a bit flat and it's not as good, but well, it'll get there. I'll work it out. I think it'd be a good band. And at the back of my mind, Charlie's 78 in May. Unbelievable. And I keep thinking, well, at some point he's going to probably want to slow right down and maybe retire and whatever. And so Disobedient Servants is a good thing to have sort of, in my locker ready to, when that day comes, to concentrate on and do more with.
Mhm. On that note, do you think that you'll ever retire, or do you think that you just want to keep making music till you drop?
I don't understand the word retire. Retire from what? I mean, this is what I do. I love it. I always want to be creative. I mean, whether it's as a writer or as a musician. I'll always be playing music. It might be just a bar down there for €100 a night and all the wine I could drink. But I'll still be playing.
Mhm.
And but I'm not cutting myself off from other things, other possibilities. I love history. I might do something a bit more with that. I have a qualification in history.
Right.
I might do something with that, and yeah. But I'll always be doing. I think it's really important, especially as you get older, to have projects, to have things that you know that you're working on, and you keep your mind active and your body active, and so I'll always be like that until I can't get out of bed anymore, and then I'll be that. But hopefully that's not for a while to come.
That seems like a wonderful note to end it on. Thank you so much for doing this interview. I really appreciate it. And
Thank
I
you
can't
so
wait
much.
to meet you someday, hopefully soon.
Yeah, thank you.